Hi everybody, welcome once again to Out of the Ordinary into the Extraordinary. I'm Robert Taylor, coming to you on WMTV.
And I'm Pamela Taylor, and as you know, we bring you guests who uplift, enlighten, inspire, educate, and entertain.
And we've got a great guest today. He is a spiritual advisor, spiritual scholar, and he's especially going to introduce us to the history of Jewish mysticism. Gives us great pleasure to welcome David Calton to the show. David, thanks for coming.
Thanks for being here.
I appreciate that.
So you actually, you grew up here in Detroit, I understand?
Yep, my parents moved here when I was a young kid, through high school. I studied in Israel for a few years, and then New York City for about 10 years. I'm University of Michigan alumni.
Wow.
10 years in New York City. Wow.
Yeah.
I came from a mixed Judaic marriage. My mother was Jewish. I have a brother and sister. I chose to be bar mitzvahed. I always had a strong interest in Judaism. That led me to go to Israel after high school. I spent a semester in University of Michigan, studied in Israel in ultra-Orthodox Rabbinic schools, and then I lived in Brooklyn, New York, in Hasidic Yiddish communities, and came back here to Detroit. I'm active the downtown synagogue. I also have a strong interest in Vedic culture. I'm a regular at Detroit ISKCON, the Hare Krishna temple.
Wow. So you've
It's an interesting combination.
yeah. And you were telling us over lunch that you've also done a lot of study of the Freemason type philosophy and the different conspiracy theories.
In literature, I'm a big reader. I took speed reading. My parents were always big readers. Big library. Lots of subjects interest me. I have a large library on Freemasonry, the Albert Pike collection. Interest, Freemasonry, Albert Pike were also Kabbalistic students. And,
Yes.
Interesting connection with that, yeah.
that was one of the things that made it interesting to me. I remember flipping through it, and I saw the stuff on Kabbalah, and it opened my interest in it. And till today, I read on the subject. Very interesting. A nice way to tie everything together.
Now,
Monotheism.
The Kabbalistic scholars back in the times when they were in Spain, places like that, they really brought together the Islamic, the Christian, and the Jewish communities, didn't it? At the time of, I think probably about, what was it, about in the 1400s maybe?
Well, the history of 1492, when Columbus sails to America, is also King Ferdinand and Isabella expelled the Jews from the Catholic kingdom of Spain, Portugal at the time, and the Jews at the time, who many had been prominent in part of the community, banking, medicine, were forced to leave. A lot of them ended up back in Israel. So the first Kabbalistic schools come in Israel about 500 years ago from the scholars who had been expelled from Spain. If people heard the famous names like the Arizal, the famous Kabbalistic books that are read today, were these Spanish-speaking Jews who were forced to leave Spain in 1492.
Yeah. I think Levi, right? Levi was one of the great scholars. Levi, his name
might be some. You might be thinking of Yehuda Halevi, who I think is actually earlier than that. He wouldn't have been in Israel. So those who had left Israel ended up settling not in Jerusalem because it wasn't as peaceful then. It was controlled by Islam, but in northern Israel and Sfas. So a lot of literature on the subject. The main bulk of the literature studied today comes from those rabbis who had return there. The Zohar, the famous translation
Yeah.
from the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was in Israel about the 2nd century, was actually first appeared in Spain.
Yeah. Maybe you can tell us the difference about the different Jewish mystical traditions. Like you got the Pharisees,
Yeah.
the Essenes, Kabbalists, and then of course Hasidics. What's the...
There's little differences in them, and people don't always realize that, and we'd like you to share that with the TV audience.
I'd say Kabbalah is a Kabbalistic mystical system which some strict rabbinic scholars reject as Jewish in origin at all. They might be actually Egyptian or Vedic in origin, and it gets mixed in, prominent in rabbinic literature, maybe going about 800 years back. It's a system for understanding how the spiritual is manifested in the material world. It's a purely spiritual system. How does God's glory, God's greatness manifest itself in the material world? And it has a systematic way of describing things, the different forces of God, the different methods that the divine is manifested in the material, and it permeates Judaism, Jewish ritual. If someone follows Jewish ritual, the Mosaic Law, there's Kabbalistic explanations for everything within the ritual, explanations for why things are done, what it means. How is it that some simple material action is causing great spiritual reactions that could cause ripple effects throughout the whole material realm? And so within pure rabbinic halakhic Judaism or any form of Judaism, it could be completely ignored. Although it's pretty universally accepted as among the Jewish scholars, it's not that common studied. Certain sects of the Hasidim are more based off of these Kabbalistic understandings.
Yeah,
We could go more into that. We mentioned the Essenes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. That's more called pre-Kabbalistic. That would be going back to ancient Israel before the destruction of the Second Temple. The modern Hasidic movements are based off of this return of Jews to Israel after the Spanish expulsion about 500 years ago.
Yeah, the Hasidics are the people you would see, especially in New York, right, with the
long side curls,
yes,
beards, never shaving their whole life, men and women walking on different sides of the street, and they wouldn't. The masters, the people that designed those systems, were Kabbalistic experts. Their systems are more Kabbalah based, although they're not. Kabbalah is not generally studied even among Hasidim. The Chabad Lubavitch is one Hasidic group, and it's actually the name of a town in Lithuania section of Russia that was destroyed World War II, that preaches Judaism, goes out, there's 4,000 synagogues all over the world.
Wow.
And that's based off of Kabbalah, although it's not actual Kabbalah. We call it Hasidus, which is based off of Kabbalah without being straight Kabbalah. But if you know the basics of Kabbalah, the spheros and the worlds, like Chesed and Gevurus and the polarities, it's in the literature. But if you study the more older Kabbalistic texts, they're more kind of scientific, straight, mathematical, formulaic explanations, maybe called karma yoga. Action, reaction in an exact mathematical, scientific way, as where Hasidus, I'll call it watered down, but is more personable to how it affects a person in their daily life, as
so
opposed
more
to being.
mystical.
So the pure mysticism would be more like mathematic, action, reaction, karmatic formulas. This is how God manifests Himself in the world. Do one action, give a beggar a quarter, and then that action causes blessing to be brought to the world and good things or bad things to happen. So the Hasidus would more put it in a practical level with the application of the mathematical formulas.
It seems like the Hasidics also, they're really into their spiritual practices and really into attaining some kind of God realization through it.
You're more focused on prayer and if you divide the schools, the general Orthodox, which is going to be, we follow the Mosaic law, eventually God will redeem us. This is what we're supposed to do, required to do. We believe that God rewards us for doing it, but it's really unclear how those whole systems work. You got to get up, you got to pray, you got to follow the rituals, the dietary laws, study the holy texts, follow all the Mosaic law. Why exactly we should do it, what's the benefit of doing it, is unclear. The Hasidim would more actively and be involved in the prayer, more God central.
Wow. So maybe, you know, all of us have heard terms Torah, Talmud, Mishnah. Maybe you can tell us what those different aspects of the Jewish philosophy are.
It covers a multi-thousand-year period of history. So the closing of the Hebrew prophets is with Ezra, when the Jews return from Babylon to Israel and are allowed to rebuild their temple from the sanction of the Persian king Darius, which is the upcoming Purim holiday. According to some traditions, if you're Queen Esther, marries King Ahasuerus. According to some traditions, their son was Darius, who allows the Jews to return to Israel, and he commissions the rebuilding of King Solomon's temple that had been destroyed by the Babylonians. So the prophecy, according to Judaism, that's the end of prophecy. The prophets in the time of Ezra and the building of the second temple was the end of prophecy. From that point on, prophecy never saw the world again.
Wow.
You're supposed to feel Jesus as a prophet or Muhammad as a prophet. A Judaic belief, prophecy ended. We have sages and leaders, but after the building of the second temple, that was the end of prophecy. So the Mishnah is the law, including how the temple operated, the whole Mosaic canon, and it covers from the building of the second temple till about 200 AD after the Roman expulsion. And after the Bar Kokhba revolts, when Rome had controlled Israel, and it was actually illegal to practice Judaism, according to Roman law, punishment of death even. In ancient Israel, at the time of the Mishnah, besides for an exception made for a few scholars that had a town in northern Israel where they compiled it. So it's kind of like the minutes of the meetings of the rabbis over that 600-year period from the end of prophecy till the writing of the Mishnah. The Talmud is the next 400 years until this dispersion period where the teachings were almost lost. It's kind of like minutes of meetings with debates, the different issue by issue, and it records the different opinions of the leaders of the generations on how to properly fulfill the ritual. It also records how the practice in the temple would have been practiced. So the temple was destroyed by the Romans and the expulsion of the Jews in about 70 AD according to conventional history. The Mishnahs brought down about 200 AD by Rav Yehuda Hanassi, who was a Roman supported Jewish royalty who was given special exception to the Roman law. And then the Talmud is recorded about 400 or 500 years later, and it's recording all the laws, and it's also recording what the rules in the temple that was already destroyed. The Jewish belief, the redemption of man, will come through the rebuilding of the temple, which will lead back into modern Israeli politics.
Mm-hmm.
With this thing, all these years after the expulsion and the destruction of the temple, we're still studying how the ritual in the temple was practiced, and in belief eventually one day again they'll be returned, the temple will be rebuilt, and these rituals will be practiced again.
Maybe you could also explain what the Ark of the Covenant is.
The Ark of the Covenant actually comes from the weekly reading of Moses from this week and last week. Moses is read over the year in synagogue. If you ever go into a synagogue, the main part of the service is the taking out of the handwritten book of Moses, like a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. That's, your person becomes a Jew coming of age. They become bound by the Mosaic law, and they publicly pronounce Moses. So the Ark of the Covenant was all the way back from the time of Moses, and that held the 10 Commandments. And of folklore, that still exists. So